Previously on Maplestory the novel, Sacred Tears.
We'll draw from the city's power grid. Rerouting power now!
Hi, Dane. I thought I'd find you here.
The darkness, he found, had always been there.
Do you think it's only coming from Dr. Long?
Perhaps there isn't just one darkness. And now the continuation of Chapter 2, Part 2. Perhaps there isn't just one darkness. What if there are multiple kinds as a result of differing negative events? The thought intrigued him, sharing his hypothesis with Menodora immediately. She asked, her mouth still full of her final bite of pie. Dane nodded in agreement, pulling out a fresh notebook and scrawling the hypothesis on the first page, giving another to Menodora. We should expand our parameters to the city. Perhaps then we can be one step closer in finding out what this darkness really is. Menodora took the notebook in surprise. Was he inviting her into his research?
You want me to help?
She asked, almost respectively leafing the pages in the notebook. With two of us gathering information and delving into the notes of the ancient mage, we should be able to find out more in a shorter amount of time, Dane exclaimed. Menodora chuckled to herself. Not many things made Dane excited, but when something did, it was always strangely soul-warming. After Menodora was taught how to sense the darkness around them accurately, the weeks passed quickly as they observed the city around them. Together, they discovered a multitude of shades of darkness. Each ranged from a small disappointment to the death of a loved one. Those that suffered from the significant events usually exuded much darker and more intense waves, which would continue to drape over them for weeks at a time. Dane and Menodora noted that this darkness would be lessened when another would come to comfort those people. After 4 weeks, the two of them convened at Dane's home to compare notes.
Do you think this is the ultimate light the mage spoke of in his writings?
Menodora asked when she and Dane compared notes one night. No, these actions alone are not it. They do, however, stem from the same place, Dane answered, setting 2 books on his desk from his personal library. A textbook labeled The Power in Emotion, and a novel, Power from the Heart. Menodora looked over the story, reading the back cover aloud.
Follow the travels of Harold Jones, a carpenter by trade, as he is unknowingly pulled into a war over the all-powerful Drumstone. Being the device capable of great good or great evil, both sides of this war vie for his favor. One side sends a gorgeous temptress to seduce him, while the other sends a timid delicacy to win him over. He must be careful, as looks can be deceiving. Will he give the device to either side, or keep it for himself? Well, Dane, I didn't know you were such a romantic,
Menodora said as she opened it to the first chapter to begin reading. It was a book that Adalia read to me when I was younger. I found it intriguing that a device like that could harness the power of human emotion as a weapon. Menodora drooped her shoulders and looked up. He had just spoiled half the book despite it being somewhat poorly written.
So, what exactly do these books have to do with what we're after?
Menodora asked, setting aside the novel and picking up the textbook while Dane read both notebooks for clues. If negative feelings and emotions are the sources of darkness, and if consolation is the key to finding this ultimate light, which lessens or reverses some of this darkness,
then there must be a way to amplify that effect and rebalance the world!
Menodora finished, walking behind Dane and looking over the notes, draping her arms over his shoulders. Exactly. The problem becomes how to do so. All the spells that I've come across in my studies only amplify things that can be quantified. Knowledge, strength, mana, magic, things of that nature, Dane answered.
What if this ultimate light the ancient mage speaks of is a device just like in the novel?
Menodora asked, grabbing a chair and sitting down next to Dane. She picked up the story and tried to quickly read it before Dane spoiled it for her again. Dane sat back, squinting his eyes and pondering. That could be a solution, except that would mean darkness also has a device. And with that being the case, there should be a direction in which this darkness is strongest. Menodora nodded her head, becoming lost in the novel as Dane studied, falling asleep a short time later. That's it! Dane exclaimed 3 hours later. Menodora jerked her head up from the desk in surprise.
What? I'm up.
Menodora slurred as Dane smiled and put a hand on her head. I found our solution to dampening this darkness, Dane answered in a quieter tone. Menodora nodded and yawned wide, trying to speak as she did.
Go ahead. I'm listening.
Darkness itself is something that is intangible yet is created when negative events happen. Perhaps then, if a positive event were to happen, the darkness would be lessened, Dane explained, Menodora blinking her eyes to become used to the lamplight.
That's a good start, but we're talking about something on a global scale.
Darkness did not manifest from nowhere. We'll start with Magatia, and just as our observations with the darkness, we'll observe when something positive happens. If possible, we will use that as a base to begin our repair of the world. Menodora smiled as her eyes became heavy and yawned widely.
That all sounds good, but can we start in the morning?
She asked. Dane looked out his window and noted that all the gas lamps had been lighted, fighting their war against their own darkness of night. Yes, perhaps that would be best, he smiled, making a few motions with his hands as a small mattress, a few blankets, and pillows floated into his room to make a bed for Menodora. Within a few moments, she was sleeping soundly. Dane, however, wanted to find more information about his theory and so went downstairs. He found his father sitting at the table with a cup of hot tea in his hand. Maxis, I didn't hear you come in, Dane said in surprise, calmly sitting down and setting his books on the table before holding his hand out. The teapot on the stove, a cup, and a plate floated over to them, setting down beside Dane. Menodora let me in a couple hours ago. I wanted to ask how things were going. Maxis absently turned the cup in his hands as he sat at the table. Menodora and I have made a few hypotheses and discoveries. There hasn't been much else, Dane replied, pouring a cup of tea for himself. Have you made any progress on this darkness? Not a substantial amount. The darkness itself seems to stem from emotion, becoming stronger when a negative event occurs, as well as being in different strengths or types depending on the event. Another thing of note is that people around the person suffering the event seem to also exude darkness, as if it were an empathetic response, Dane answered, dropping a sugar cube into the tea and taking a sip. What about a way to counter it? I assume this darkness is the reason for the world's imbalance you mentioned 5 years ago. Yes, in fact, to both your questions. The counter to darkness seems to lie somewhere in positive events and consolation to those who have suffered a major adverse event. These positive events, or as Menodora and I are calling them, light, do not entirely erase the darkness hanging around one person. They do lessen its effects. Have you found if others around them may be affected by darkness coming from one person? Maxis asked, taking another sip of his tea. What do you mean, Maxis? Dane asked with a slight edge. His research had always been of the highest quality. How could someone question his oversight of something? I remember your saying something when you started this journey. It has no form, yet it fills the world. It has no substance, yet it taints even the purest of hearts. It has no will, yet all who see it succumb to it. That has always stuck with me, and I wonder if this darkness may also affect those around the person who has experienced some adverse event, and isn't just an empathetic response. Dane lowered his brow as he brought out his notebook. This was something that he hadn't considered. Are you suggesting that the darkness from one person could be amplifying the darkness within others? Or worse still, infecting others with darkness? Dane asked, looking through his notes for something on the matter that he was presented with, but finding nothing of the sort. I'm saying that it could be a possibility. Perhaps that is why darkness is only diminished when a light event occurs. Dane put a hand over his mouth as thoughts swirled in his mind. Here is another theory I offer you, Maxis said, putting down his cup and jiggling his index finger in the air. As you have said, the light diminishes darkness, but doesn't get rid of it. What if this darkness is strong enough to overpower one person's light? Dane tilted his head in interest, closing his journal as he looked to Maxis. How do you mean? What if, to be rid of darkness, there must be more than one source of light? Perhaps there needs to be more than one person's light to match, then overpower the darkness and, in turn, amplifying the buried light within them. If darkness can amplify darkness, then shouldn't the opposite be true? Dane's eyes flitted back and forth, going up to his room and bringing down the ancient mage's journal. He searched for quite a while to see if this mage had possibly attempted a thought of this simple suggestion. But as the pages turned, Dane found nothing of this light-amplifying theory. This could be a possibility. It is so simple, yet so profound. Thank you, Maxis, Dane said, his face almost glowing with delight that a new path of possibility had been laid out before him.
You're welcome, son. But might I suggest you get some rest? It appears you will be busy very soon.
Maxis smiled. Dane may be grown and living in his own house, but he would always be his son. Dane kept reading for a bit when the words on his page blurred. His head and eyelids felt heavy, and his whole body began to ache.
I suppose even the greatest minds sometimes need rest,
Dane grunted, before leaning forward and falling asleep, using the journal as a pillow. Maxis chuckled, reaching for a blanket Adalia had sent with him and draped it over Dane's back and shoulders. As Maxis left, he couldn't help but wonder where these dark places were Dane said he would travel to. So far, the most dismal he had seen was the fact that his son was exposing human emotions to be the cause of the world's imbalance.
Just be safe, Dane,
Maxis whispered as he returned home. Without a doubt, this was only the beginning of something far more significant than he could ever imagine.
When your fires all die out, all you know just turns to ash, and your life goes slipping, spinning into doubt. Sunshine trapped inside your heart, cold and lost and in the dark. Looking back on all this, nobody was there. Nothing left to lose. Gotta find the you that's hidden deep